when you study 19th century American labor, you get the idea that, shouldn't it be a perfect environment for workers to organize, discuss their working conditions, and negotiate? You would think labor unions would do well, and contrasting the American labor movement in the late 19th century with European labor unions, it's a stark contrast. By the late 19th century, European labor unions are politically powerful, economically powerful. They have political parties, the Labour Party in England, the UK. You have very well developed labor unions in Europe in the late 19th century. I mean, every labor union in each country in Europe starts developing a working class labor party in the UK. And so it's really interesting to contrast it with the labor movement in the United States. And labor unions in the 19th century, didn't do quite as well as European ones. And this section, I want to kind of go over reasons for the failure of labor unions. Why did they not do well in the late 19th century? When you study what American working conditions and, based on early 21st century, attitudes and perceptions of what things should be like, it doesn't balance out very well, or doesn't look very well. Good. And so this is a list of reasons why, labor unions really didn't do as well as they could have as compared to Europe. Number one of the reasons why unions did well in Europe is Europe. When you study European history, it's heavily class based. When you study medieval European history, early modern Europe, into the 19th century, Europe had a class system, a very well developed one, right? Nobility, landed gentry, clergy, merchant class, medieval Europe serfs, later on peasants, and so and everyone knew their place. Everyone knew their place in society. And so when you get to the 19th century and you see these labor movements develop, European class consciousness is very strong. That's why Karl Marx, when Karl Marx started writing, he tapped into that well-established discontent with the class system in Europe and the economic conditions in Europe, if you were lower class, working class, or labor class, or whatever. And so that's one of the reasons why, labor unions did really well. There's a market for them. There's a class of people that know they're the working class. They know they're not socially superior. Their social betters constantly remind them, that they are not, that they're poor, they're the working class or whatever. And so you get it. You have this class consciousness in Europe that doesn't exist really in the United States. The United States, generally considered, at least among the European population, generally considered an egalitarian society. That you didn't have a social better necessarily. And so when you look at labor unions in the United States, there's not the same level of class resentment or class consciousness as in Europe. Immigration patterns are another reason why labor unions don't do well in the United States. You had a large variety of different people from different countries, ethnic groups, racial groups, and so the workforce is not homogeneous. And so, it's very easy for me as a factory owner to kind of pit you against each other. Italians versus the Greeks, black versus white, men versus women, Irish versus English. Very easy to kind of pit you against each other, where instead of cooperating, you're fighting with each other. Or you're like, I'm not going to work with them. I'm not going to work with those Italians. And so just not going to do it. Another reason is what developed in American culture in the late 19th century, post Civil War America, is this idea that unionism was a foreign European radical idea, and so it was un-American. It was anti-American, un-American. That this idea of Marxism or unionism or whatever, it was a radical concept. It was un-American. It was anti-American, and so you have a very strong cultural bias against labor unions. Media at the time, newspapers, the media pushes against it. Industrialists, government, schools, churches. You have this idea of, unions are European, they're foreign, they're dangerous, they're radical, they're un-American, they're anti-American. And so, if you're a new legal immigrant to America and you're like, I want to be a good American. Well, what do you get told? Well, to be a good American, you must love Grandma Apple Pie and baseball. And you don't like unions. You're told culturally. What does it mean to be American? What it means is that you don't listen to that labor guy. He's a dangerous foreign radical. He's an agitator. He's a terrorist. He's not a good guy. Lack of common goals among labor leaders. Some labor leaders were more practical, like the Samuel Gompers of the world. A pay raise. And then you had more utopian or radical, however you want to label them, more utopian or radical labor unions, like the IWW. Granted, a 20th century example, but there's more radical idea that the labor unions should topple the system. Why continue exploitation of the workers with just a few cents more a day? That just, you can keep exploiting them and oppressing them. And so you have the IWW examples of that more radical utopian labor unions that sought to destroy or replace the system. And what's interesting is that plays into the idea we talked about a minute ago. Unionism equals anti-Americanism. You got some labor unions were radical enough that they talked about, destroying the capitalist system, destroying the U.S. economy. And that kind of plays into that idea that we'll see unions are radical foreign terrorists hell-bent on destroying America. Strength of big business, strong support of business by government, use of media, that all combines into a culture where every institution is opposed to you. The newspapers, the media can be used to turn your strike or your protest into dangerous to national security. And big business or businesses could regularly count on the support of government to send in the Marines. You're a national security threat. Send in the Marines. All right. So the use of the media is against you. Big business is strong. They can physically break your strike with the Pinkerton men. You can research that on your own. The Pinkerton men, Pinkerton, Pinkerton men. During the Civil War, they were spies in an intelligence group. After the Civil War, they were called hired thugs to break your strike physically. So those all worked together to keep labor unions struggling in the late 19th century.